Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third of our four statewide virtual policy institutes. I am Stacy Morgan. I am the Executive Director of the Mental Health Transformation Alliance. Before we get started, we're so excited to offer today's webinar in both English and Spanish. Thank you to the team at Language Service Solutions for being here today and providing this service. I will turn it over to them to explain how you can utilize these services.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. The organizers of this event are firmly committed to facilitating bilingual communication during today's meeting. My name is Murtado and my colleague and co-interpreter is Angie, and we are representing Language Service Solutions. We will be providing interpretation from English into Spanish and Spanish into English. Muy buenos días. Los organizadores de este evento tienen la firme determinación de facilitar la comunicación bilingüe durante la reunión de hoy. Mi nombre es Murtado y mi co-intérprete es Angelina y estamos representando a Language Service Solutions. Vamos a ofrecer interpretación simultánea del español al inglés y del inglés al español. If there will be Spanish speakers today and you want interpretation into English, select your language channel by going to the bottom right-hand corner of your Zoom screen, click on the globe if you are using a computer, or the three dots if you're connecting from a tablet or an iPhone or a phone. Select interpretation, then English, and click done at the end. Si usted quiere escuchar y participar en español, seleccione su canal de idioma haciendo clic abajo a la derecha de su pantalla Zoom, en el globito si usa una computadora o en los tres puntitos si está conectándose por medio de un teléfono celular. Seleccione interpretación, luego español y luego haga clic en Done o terminado al terminar para activar esta función. A few guidelines for creating
Okay. I believe
multilingual spaces in both languages, but you all please do not do that to transmit your message. Yo estoy hablando muy rápido porque estoy
Okay. For closed captioning, click the CC icon and select Show Subtitle. To turn off captions, click on the CC again, and then hide subtitle. That again, for closed captioning, if you would like to choose, have closed captioning abilities, click the CC icon at the bottom of your screen and choose Show Subtitle. Today, we will be focusing on advocacy on the state level. You will hear from some wonderful speakers and get to explore how to impact policy on the state level. State lawmakers are members of local communities and are elected to represent their communities on the state level. They are often accessible and responsive to members of their communities. State legislative bodies often have less restrictions than the federal body. Due to this, they are often more productive in terms of bills passed. State agencies also create their own administrative policies that impact the lives of people in the state. State agency leaders are often appointed by legislative or executive branch leaders. Momentum for issues on the state level can also drive national policy conversations. The goal of this institute is to explore effective strategies for advocating on the state level for policies that impact families, youth, and children. You will hear from a variety of speakers and panelists to learn about the important advocacy work that can happen at the state level. Before we get started, we wanted to thank all of you for logging on and joining us today. Please type any questions you might have in the chat or question and answer box, and we will do our best to make sure it is answered. PCANC's Communication Manager Chris will be live tweeting this event, so make sure that you check that out at @PCANC and use the hashtag NC Policy Institutes 2021. And again, there it is shown on the screen. Additionally, we are recording today's institute, and this recording will be shared afterwards. We also have the recordings available from our previous institutes if you missed them or just would like to rewatch them. Feel free to reach out for a link to access the recording. We want to thank our sponsors for this event, WellCare and Essentials for Childhood. Without their support, this event would not be possible. We would also like to thank the State Collaborative Planning Group for all of their hard work to make this event happen. This is the third of our 4 policy institutes hosted by PCANC and the North Carolina Collaborative for Children, Youth, and Families. The final institute will be in 2 weeks on October 19th and will focus on advocacy on the federal level. We will be putting the registration links in the chat, so keep your eye out. If you have not registered, please do so. We look forward to having you there. Today, we will hear from many dynamic and engaging speakers. We will start off with a special welcome message from Dr. Charlene Wong, followed by an opening keynote from Leslie Boney and Advocacy 201 by Adam Sotak. We will then take a short break in return for our Parent Voice keynote delivered by Dr. Renita Webb. And lastly, a panel discussion with State Representative Marsha Moray, David Willis, Rachel Hunt, and John Torbett. All right, let's get started. First is our a special welcome video from Dr. Charlene Wong, Assistant Secretary for Children and Families at the Department of Health and Human Services.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Charlene Wong, the Assistant Secretary for Children and Families at the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. I am thrilled to be welcoming you today to this North Carolina statewide virtual policy institute on advocacy, collaboration, and coalition building. The power of communities to advocate for and drive policies that support the health and well-being of children and their families cannot be understated, particularly during this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. At the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, we continue to work towards achieving our vision of children who are healthy and thriving in safe, stable, and nurturing families, schools, and communities. With that vision in mind, the department is launching a new division of child and family well-being that will work to meet the health, social, and educational needs of children, youth, and their families in North Carolina. We'll be working to achieve that by enhancing how children and their families can access programs that support their well-being. We know that coordination across programs in the mental, social, and health spaces can give more families access to these programs that they really need. An early area of work will be making it easier for children and families to access and utilize the nutrition support programs, for example, WIC and SNAP. The division will also be working to coordinate increased investments in child and family well-being. An example of early work here will be thinking through the use of the American Rescue Plan funds and how these funds can be used to close key equity gaps in child well-being, including more equitable access to the continuum of mental health services for children and youth. Finally, the division will be elevating the values of the teams and partners all across the state who are working to support child and family well-being. We're working to create a thriving culture in the division, as well as with partners, to really celebrate the positive impact that we're having on child and family well-being. To elevate and coordinate the critical work of supporting whole child and family health, the Division of Child and Family Well-Being will bring together complementary programs from within the department that serve children and families. These programs include nutrition programs for children, families, and seniors, such as WIC, SNAP, and the Child and Adult Care Food Program, the Early Intervention Infant Toddler Program, health-related services and programs for children, such as school health promotion, home visiting, and programs for children and youth with special health care needs, and school and community mental health services for children and youth. We expect the Division of Child and Family Wellbeing to launch starting in the winter. During the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, we've learned that we can make a greater impact when we collaborate across teams and with communities to improve access to our programs and services. We are proud of how we at the department, and with so many partners across North Carolina, including all of you here today, have transformed how we work together as a team to serve children and families during this unprecedented global crisis. Thank you so much to the organizers of this virtual institute for creating a space for us to connect and to build and strengthen the skills that we all need to advocate for children, youth, and their families. These collective efforts will allow us to make that positive impact for children and families that we're all looking for by ensuring that the programs and services are available and reach those who need them the most. Thank you and enjoy the Institute.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wong. Now we would like to transition to our opening keynote address, delivered by Leslie Boney, the Director of the Institute for Emerging Issues and the Vice Provost for Outreach and Engagement at NC State University. Leslie, I will let you take it over.
Thank you, Stacy, and thanks to everybody for being part of this. I know you've got a busy set of responsibilities, and taking time out for this and things like this, I think is a really important thing. And sometimes it can be kind of crowded to the side because there's the urgent, but this is one of those things that I think is important and makes a real difference in your professional development, but also in your ability to get things done. So thanks to the organization for pulling together these seminars. I really like the idea of doing local, state, and federal, because there really are some different players on each of those levels. I'm going to be mostly focusing on state level because that's what I've been doing and working on for the last 28 years. I've worked in the governor's office. I've worked in a couple of different state agencies for a nonprofit, for the UNC system office, and now for one of the constituent institutions of the UNC system, NC State University. So I've been lobbied upon, and I've been a lobbyist, I guess, advocating for issues, but also staying on the sidelines and having people come to me and ask for something. And so I have a little bit of experience from both perspectives and really wanted to just share some of that with you today. I'm going to share my screen and just give you a little bit of a sense of what I'm going to be talking about. The hold on just a second. Go over to here. Everything was working fine before, and now it's not. Hold on just a second. Here we go. All right. Okay. All right.
There we go. There we go.
All right. So this is a little bit of a strange title for a presentation, but I'm going to get to all this, I promise, and it won't be quite as strange as it seems. I now work for the Institute for Emerging Issues at NC State University, and we are a group that tries to look around the corner and tries to imagine what might be coming up in North Carolina. And so over the past couple of years, we've worked on things related to early childhood, civil conversations, digital equity, telehealth, and educational attainment. We do a every other week podcast where we talk about things from learning loss to food insecurity to ACEs to telehealth, mental health challenges. That's called First in Future. And so along the way, we do not advocate, we provide information to the public, but I have had some thoughts over the past few years about advocacy and wanted to share some of those with you today. Let me start with just trying to make one point that I think is important, and that is that you're going to be spending a lot of time today talking about the legislature, and they are absolutely the top of the iceberg. They are the most visible group to advocate to. Just really wanted to remind you that there are a number of other influential ways that you can advocate on a state level to make a difference, starting with agencies, whether it's DPI or DHHS or the AG's office or crime control and public safety. There are people who have enormous power to make a difference. And I'd encourage you to think about them as you think about advocacy. If you just imagine the policies that were decided upon over the past year to allow school or not school, the impact that's had on child abuse detection and prevention. Those people who are making those decisions on a state level are really important. They have discretionary power to interpret the laws that the General Assembly passes. They have some independent authority to make policy. They have the ability to steer federal funds, and they have the ability to make a huge difference in the state. And some of what I'm going to be talking about applies to them as well as to legislators. Corporate policymakers are often left out of the conversation, but again, think about the decision by corporate policymakers at Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina and other places in North Carolina that are setting reimbursement policies over the past year. Blue Cross Blue Shield permitted telehealth at the same reimbursement rate in 2020, and telehealth increased by 7,500% in a single year. Think about the impact of that on, again, child abuse prevention. The Redwoods Group and other insurers and nonprofits that work in the space adjunct to the prevention of child abuse make a huge difference in the policies that they come up with. And just this morning, a report's going to come out about child abuse in France, documentation of some 200,000 cases that were permitted by the church. Think about the ability to work with church leaders across the state on policies and ideas that are going to prevent child abuse. And finally, your peers are a really important group, those who work in early childhood education, those who may work adjunct to you on ACEs or resilience issues are critical. And if they understand what your issues are, they can amplify your message. So being able to communicate clearly with them, all those things are maybe the part of the iceberg that's below the surface. But I just wanted to, as we go into today, to remind you that there are people working who have power on a statewide level who are not elected officials that are very important to pay attention to and think about. With that, I wanted to start just 5 quick ideas about advocacy and how you do it. And it starts with my great aunt Sue in Duplin County, who was notorious for being unable to say anything negative about anyone. And finally, some friends of hers confronted her one day and asked about Bob, who everybody knew was an absolute jerk and nobody could find anything nice to say about. And they asked her about it. And she finally came up with, well, you know what? Bob has a nice whistle. And I think the truth is we can find and must find with anyone that we are talking to something that we have in common. It's easy to see the things that we disagree with them on and to be frustrated by those and to focus on those. But if you can find any sort of common ground to start with, even if it's just a principle, even if you disagree with the application of the principle, it can make a huge difference in having a conversation. I was working for Governor Hunt in the late 1990s when he unveiled his Get Tough on Crime plan. And he went to the News and Observer for an editorial board meeting, and the publisher of the NNO spent 30 minutes ripping apart 11 out of the 12 planks of Governor Hunt's crime plan. And he finally finished. The crime plan was in shreds on the floor. It had just been completely eviscerated by this guy who was outraged by everything he was doing. Governor Hunt takes a long, deep breath and finally says, well, I noticed you didn't say anything about my 12th point, the middle school after-school program. It's designed to prevent crime. And everybody in the room laughs, but then there's a long and pretty pleasant conversation about prevention versus punishment. And the editorial that's written about the crime plan is still scathing, but not as scathing as it could have been. And it's because Governor Hunt was able to find some sort of common frame of agreement. And I think you can do that with anybody that you're talking to. You just have to be willing to look for it and believe that it is possible. Second point, data gets you in the door, stories get you off the floor. You all, unfortunately, have a lot of data that is compelling and frightening when it comes to child abuse in North Carolina. And it's tempting to rely exclusively on that because it should be all that is needed. But the reality is everybody has a lot of other things going on in their lives. And the question is not whether child abuse is important or not, but because there's no coalition to increase child abuse. But the question is how to prioritize it and how to really raise it to the next level. And you do that, I think, through engaging emotions. And a lot of times that comes by telling compelling stories. We're currently struggling at the Institute for Emerging Issues with an issue we're working on for February. It relates to attainment, reaching attainment goals for the state. How do we get more people to have more than a high school credential by 2030? And if we don't do anything, we're going to be 400,000 people short by 2030. So the temptation is just to say, we're going to be 400,000 short by 2030 and sort of end that and assume that everybody's going to be excited about doing something about it. But the reality is 400,000 is just a gigantic number. It's not really personal necessarily to the person who's listening to it because, oh, well, somebody else can take care of that. And 2030, even though it's just around the corner, is really something that is almost too far out for people to focus on right now in the middle of a pandemic. So we've got to figure out a way to make those numbers personal on a county level, and the My Future NC Commission is doing a great job of that. We've got to figure out a way to say, here's what needs to be happening in 2021 to get there. And we've got to find a way to tell compelling stories about real people whose lives are changed because they got educational attainment. So that's the meaning of data gets you in the door, stories get you off the floor. Stories are the things that compel people to do something. Data gets their interest, stories enable you to make progress. Third issue, I think, is probably reasonably controversial, but I happen to be a huge fan of Band-Aids. They contain bleeding, they prevent infection, and billions are sold all across the world each year. Unfortunately, people hate Band-Aid solutions. I did a search over the past month of people being critical of Band-Aid solutions, and it seems that Band-Aid solutions don't redevelop economies. They don't reform the criminal justice system. They don't rebuild baseball franchises. Nobody likes Band-Aid solutions, and I'm guessing in the prevention of child abuse community, a lot of people have been critical of Band-Aid solutions for prevention of child abuse. But I would just say it's sort of like getting mad at your car because it can't fly you to Milwaukee. That's not the intended use. And in a lot of cases, a Band-Aid solution is what is called for to literally stop the bleeding. In the early days of COVID, I think a lot of people worried that it was going to prevent child abuse detection because those children weren't going to be there in person. And everybody said, okay, the ideal is to get teachers into the homes. We've got to do home visits. And that just wasn't practical early on. So the Band-Aid solution was getting training for people in how to detect the same things that they could normally see in person in a classroom over Zoom. It was not the ideal solution. It was a Band-Aid solution, and it made some difference. A sister observation would be remembering one of the Rolling Stones songs, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you just might find that you can get half of what you want. And getting half of what you want is not really popular these days. We live in a world of binaries where people say, you either need to be completely pure on one side, or you have fundamentally compromised your principles and you have destroyed the integrity of your argument. And I absolutely appreciate that and understand that and empathize with it. And what I would say is that, and that's what's going on in Washington right now, honestly, is there's a disagreement on principle. And the danger is that the government shuts down. The upside is that on both sides, I think there are some people who would rather get nothing than risk the possibility of compromising what they see as an inviolable principle. And there are times when that is absolutely important. And there are other times when half a loaf is not bad. Thinking about a couple of years ago, we did an emerging issues forum on the importance of four-year-old, extending school services to four-year-olds. And a bunch of business people left our meeting. They walked down to the General Assembly, and out of the back end came $87 million in funding for four-year-olds. The immediate criticism was that we needed $130 million for four-year-olds. And that was also undeniably true. I would argue, at least over the past 3 years, that the $87 million has made a difference to a lot of four-year-olds. It's a half loaf solution. I'm not suggesting you compromise your principles. I'm saying that there are times when half a loaf makes more sense. Final point, I'm a big believer in pilots, in incubation. When the Institute for Emerging Issues works, we always try to work on a state level with bringing together people who might be able to come up with top-down solutions. But we also always work on a community level. We try to find 5 places all across the state, each forum that we have, where that are from the East and from the West, from their urban areas, from the rural areas. And the idea is that there are always local people who are doing something amazing. And our job is to lift it up and let people know about it. And the reason it works, I believe, is because we are fundamentally an envious people. We don't like the idea of the county next door to us doing something that we're not doing. So Raleigh doesn't like it when Durham does something amazing. Northampton doesn't like it when Halifax does something amazing. Rocky Mount doesn't like it when Wilson does something amazing. And the idea of lifting up these examples is to let people see that it is possible by people who look like them and maybe have the same resources as they do to make something. And so I would say envy is not always a deadly sin. Sometimes it can be really helpful when it comes to state level advocacy. Final observation is about tribe. We know that the impact of the pandemic has been really negative when it comes to tribalism. When people are scared, people tend to retreat to the people who have the same skin color as they do, or the same income level, or the same political beliefs. We stop listening, and we just want to be in a safe place. And we just have to admit that that is the case. But if we're going to make progress in these times, we need to find a way to do more to connect beyond our immediate tribe. We need to do everything we can to help people see themselves as part of a larger tribe, as part of a set of concentric circles of connection. We are individuals, absolutely. We live in communities, yes. We live in counties. We also live in regions. We live in states. We live in the country. We live in the world. And as you talk to people that you're advocating to on a state level, I hope that you will find a way to remind them and find that common ground of a common humanity, of some sort of collective responsibility that we all have to get something done. The responsibility to listen to data and understand that it's made up of a series of anecdotes and a series of stories, and then to get them to commit to making even the smallest step to begin making a difference. Thanks to all of you for what you're doing and the difference that you're making. Be glad to take some questions if we have time.
Thank you so much. Did we have any questions or answers? Let me check to see. We did not. We have, if you will check the chat though, we have some awesome comments about you, of the information that you shared, and about you being an awesome speaker. So thank you so much. We appreciate it. That was great. So up next is Adam Sotak, Public Engagement Director for NC Child, who would be giving today's Advocacy 201 presentation. Adam, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Stacy. I am going to get my screen share moving here. Hopefully everyone can see that. Again, my thanks go out to all of the organizers of these policy institutes. Thank you, especially Stacy and Malia and all others that have been pulling these together. It's a pleasure to be a part of these. And NC Child is a nonprofit child advocacy organization. And our mission is focused on helping children thrive, regardless of race or place of birth here in the state of North Carolina. And we do that basically by focusing on policy advocacy and doing that through a lens of community engagement and trying to center the lives and the stories and the experiences of the people that we work with across the state. And I'm going to talk to you all about some basic concepts related to advocacy today, and specifically around some of the machinations of our state government. And you all are going to be joined by 4 speakers from the North Carolina House of Representatives later on in the Institute. And I know that they will have far more greater insight from their personal experiences, but I am going to talk to you all some about how that body works and how we might be able to work together to be more effective advocates. This is the agenda and just some of the things that I am going to try to go through during my time with you all. And Malia and others have promised me they would help keep an eye on the chat and interrupt me if we have questions along the way. So hopefully we can get those answered. I want to talk about the lay of the land. I want to talk a little bit about the budget process, because that's something that's certainly front and center in North Carolina, as well as a few other concepts here today related to advocating at the state level in North Carolina. Before I go any further, I just wanted to call your attention to an advocacy toolkit that NC Child has developed, and we encourage all of you to take a look at that. You can view it online and download it. Within our advocacy toolkit, there are also some worksheets that you can print off that go into even greater detail around some of the tactics or issues that we talk about in that advocacy toolkit. So for example, if you are interested in holding a local meeting in your city or town with a legislator or a city council member or a county commissioner, we have a worksheet in there that can help give you some guiding questions and thoughts about how you might be able to organize a successful meeting and have that, hopefully that result that you're looking for as an advocate. The first thing I just wanted to say before we start talking about this topic of advocacy and getting into some of the ins and outs of how our state government works is that opportunity is knocking right now. And quite frankly, we need to heed the call. I mean, we're at a critical time. I think we all would agree in our state, in our country. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has certainly opened up some of the long-standing systemic issues and problems that we have been facing as a society, and have put those even more front and center. And right now is a time for advocates. It's time for community engagement and organizing and getting involved, hopefully in a way that can make an impact and make our communities better. And the bottom line is your voice is needed. Everyone can be an advocate. Everyone's voice has value and worth and can make an impact. A basic definition that we like to share with folks when we're talking about advocacy is quite simply, it's defending or promoting a cause. And it goes beyond changing or shaping a particular piece of legislation. In a lot of ways, advocacy is about systems change and how are we moving towards the end goal that may be very long term. We might even think is unattainable in some ways, but we're wanting to strive to get there. But advocacy is a process that needs to be strategic and well thought out and center the voices of those in our community and be powerful. I mean, power is often seen as, I think, a bad word, maybe a taboo subject in a lot of ways. We don't equate a lot of times a lot of good things with the term power. But the bottom line is that power dynamics are at work, and we as advocates need to understand how to utilize power in our favor to advocate for the causes that we want to see happen and make change. In essence, going along with the resiliency model and that conversation that I know, so many of you are intricately involved in, we're advocating to build resilient communities, and we're striving to create environments that prevent adverse childhood experiences, that prevent trauma, that get to the root and hopefully make those systemic changes that we want to see. And yes, we need to be strategic, and it's a gradual process. I don't think any of us are naive about that. I know I certainly am not after doing this for 20 plus years in the state of North Carolina. But if we're trying to build together to sustain some real change, keeping our eyes on the prize in this way is helpful. Child and family involvement on advocacy efforts can have a huge impact. And I know I don't have to tell you all that, members of the North Carolina Collaborative, this is what you're about, Prevent Child Abuse, NC Child, so many of the other organizations that are involved in this institute. We're trying our best to center the voices of children and families. And you're going to hear later as well from our NC Child's PAC manager, Parent Advisory Council manager, Dr. Renita Webb. And she's going to be talking all about that voice of parents and how that can have an impact in the advocacy process. So I want to now get into some of the lay of the land here in North Carolina. And I know for some of you all, this is going to be a review, and maybe you've heard this a few times, but hopefully you'll pick up something new as I go along here. So one of the first things I always talk to folks about, and quite frankly, I'm surprised by a lot of times, is people maybe not having a full understanding even of who represents them at different levels of government. This slide right here shows you all of the folks that essentially every individual in our state goes to the ballot box and elects. And we have a very long ballot in the state of North Carolina. Not every state elects their agriculture commissioner and insurance commissioner and soil and water conservation district supervisor and all these other things. But here in North Carolina, we do. So there are plenty of opportunities to elect and think about people that represent you. And I just think it's real important that we all start with that base understanding. Who is my North Carolina House representative? Who is our district court judge or superior court judge? And just getting at least somewhat familiar with who those folks are, because that will help your advocacy as you move forward. Now, when we talk specifically about the North Carolina General Assembly, so our elected leaders in the state legislature, along with the governor, have a tremendous amount of power to pass laws that shape the lives of all North Carolinians. And so it's important that we understand who these folks are. And as a basic overview, we have 120 members of our North Carolina House of Representatives. So those are spread all throughout the state of North Carolina, and they represent districts based on population size. And I'm going to talk a little bit about redistricting later, but you have that 120 member body. They are led by the Speaker of the House currently, Tim Moore, who is a Republican from Cleveland County. And so the speaker has a lot of power to determine who gets assigned to committees and maybe how particular pieces of legislation are featured or not featured, et cetera. There's lots of ins and outs there. But it's important to understand who the leadership is in the legislature. And then we have 50 members of our North Carolina Senate. So once again, they represent people all across the state. They represent a larger number of people, therefore have larger districts than the House members. But their job is essentially the same, to go to Raleigh and to pass policies that work for their constituents. They are currently led by the president pro tem of the North Carolina Senate is Phil Berger, who is a Republican member from Rockingham County. And the terms for all our House and Senate members are 2 years. So every 2 years in the even numbered years, so 2020, 2022, et cetera, we elect all 170 members back to these bodies. So it's essentially the voters' opportunity to say yay or nay to those elected leaders. Just to get into a little bit of how the General Assembly works. The odd number years, like this year, is really the bulk of the work of the legislature. We call that our long session. So the first year of the 2-year cycle is the long session, and that starts in late January, and it continues. And hint here, as you all know, it's still going right now, and here we are in October. So North Carolina does not have set term limits or limits on the time that the legislative body can be meeting. Some states have that. They have like a stricter limit of, okay, the legislature can only be in session for 90 days or what have you. But here in North Carolina, we don't have a set end date. So it really comes down to when they're able to get their business wrapped up. And I'm going to talk some more about that shortly. The short session is in the second year of the cycle, that even numbered year. That usually starts in late April or May and runs until, again, question mark, but traditionally they try to get out of there around July 4th or so. And the short session is really supposed to be a budget tweaking, more or less kind of session. They're not known to take up a lot of larger, substantial policy issues during that short session. Although let me just say they can do that, and that does happen at times. The rules of the legislature and what bills are brought forward, et cetera, there's a lot of leeway there on how that can actually happen, and sometimes it gets confusing. Another thing that folks don't really understand, these last 2 bullet points that I just wanted to point out, is that our legislators on paper make very little money. It's a $14,000 a year job at base pay. A lot of people are surprised by that. We're the largest, I believe, the largest state left in the country that has a part-time legislature. And so this is becoming an issue more and more in North Carolina, where obviously the cycles of the legislature is not so part-time, it's pretty much full-time. So it brings up this idea of who can really represent and be able to do that. And then the other thing is that most legislators have very little staff support. Most of your rank and file legislators have one staff person. They have a legislative assistant who helps answer the calls in the legislative building, helps schedule appointments, do a variety of other things. But these are not folks that have, 15 staff members at their beck and call to help constituents out. And so that's just something I like to point out to folks too, just to give them an idea of that. Now, as we talk about more about how the session works, the session throughout the legislative session, the business is really held like Monday night, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday up until around lunchtime. Again, of course, all of that can be changed to some degree, but if you're interested in committee meetings and really following what's going on at the legislature, my experience shows me that Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays mornings are really going to be your days of the most action, where you have the most committee meetings being held, your best chance to talk to legislators while they're in Raleigh, et cetera. And legislators serve on a variety of committees and subcommittees, and this is where much of the work gets done. So it's important to understand who are the chairs of various committees you're interested in, who are the members of those committees, what committees are your legislators serving on, because that can be an important avenue for your advocacy. And the last point here is the majority party gets a lot of say over who the members are on these committees and what the makeup of those committees are. So a lot of that, those decisions are internal. You know, the people elect the General Assembly, and then they do a lot of internal work, which is about who's on which committee and who gets elected speaker or president pro tem and all that stuff. And whoever holds the majority is going to have a lot of say in how that happens. Now I want to talk a little bit about the budget. And as you all know, we do not currently have a working budget that has been enacted yet for the fiscal years of 2021 through 2023. And this is, you know, a main goal of the legislature during their every 2 years of their legislative cycle. We have not had a full acting budget in the state of North Carolina for a few years now. And the reason being that they've not been able to find enough common ground to get a agreed upon full state budget passed and or overridden of the governor's veto and agreed upon. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So how the budget process works is at the beginning of during the 2 year cycle in the long year like now, 3 versions of our state budget are created. And when we talk about the amount in our state budget, we're talking around $26 billion in revenue that is spent out to support the people of North Carolina and all the functions of government. And so the House comes up with their version. Hey, this is what we think is a great budget for our state. The Senate comes up with their version, and the governor has his or her version of the budget. And again, what we have to do is get to some agreements and compromise within all of those. So what you have currently is sort of an anomaly where normally the 2 legislative bodies, after they pass their versions, they would come together, compromise, and pass a compromise full budget out of the legislature and then send that to the governor. But currently, they have made that agreement between the House and Senate. And they haven't released it publicly, but they've already sent it over to the governor. And this is hopefully a way to further bipartisanship and make this situation happen where the governor and the legislature can work out their differences and then come to a compromise and be able to present that to that agreement to everyone and vote on that agreement so we actually have a full state budget. Now, how this works is the governor can veto. If the legislature were to go back and pass their compromise and send it to the governor, just like in the last budget cycle, the governor can veto that. And then it takes a 3/5 supermajority to override any veto from the governor. So that means that it can't just be a +1 majority vote. There has to be 3/5 members of both chambers in order to override that. And the last time around, this is what happened. The governor vetoed the budget and the North Carolina Senate was not able to override that budget. And so instead, what we came up with was basically a series of mini budget bills. After this, I'll stop talking for a minute and see if maybe we have any questions or anything. And so this is what I think most of us are hoping we will avoid this time around, that we will actually have a full budget agreement. If we don't, then there can be these series of mini budget bills that are passed to sustain various segments of government and all that. And in North Carolina, we don't have a shutdown per se if we don't come to a budget agreement. What happens is that we continue to function on the previous year's funding levels. And the reason that that is a problem is that there's obviously growth and changes in the way different things need to be funded year by year. And if we're not keeping up with that as a state, then we're certainly some folks are going to be hard hit by that, and those in our most impacted communities for sure. So with that, I'm going to just stop for a second and see if we've got any questions or anything.
Adam, we do have one question in the Q&A. It says, Adam, you noted the $14,000 base pay of our state legislators. That seems to imply there may be opportunities for additional pay related to their legislative activities. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I won't say I know every detailer in and out, but there is also per diems that are offered to legislators and reimbursements for certain things. So they are offered per diems and additional stipends, for lack of a better term, for the time that they are in session in Raleigh, to help cover their meal expenses, housing costs, et cetera. And then some of the members of the leadership of the legislature have a higher base pay than that 14,000. Again, not exorbitant amounts, but there is some changes in that structural pay. And I've heard it. I believe in the past I've heard things of like, okay, rank and file legislator, if you take into account all their per diem and everything for like a long session, it might come out to about 40,000. But again, that's incorporating the cost of traveling back and forth from Swain County or wherever the legislator lives and renting an apartment and so on and so forth. So that's my understanding.
Thank you. I'm looking, I don't think I see any other questions in the chat yet, but if I see any, I will let you know.
All right. Well, that's sort of my 2 cents on, the mechanics of the legislature and the budget process. The other thing I wanted to mention, and Dr. Wong said this at the opening, and I think everybody is trying to really wrap our heads around this, is how is North Carolina at the state, at the local level, et cetera, going to be spending out federal COVID-19 relief funds? We have gotten billions of dollars into the state of North Carolina over the last 18 months or so. That is to go, through our state legislature, through local school boards, through county commissions, through cities and towns. There's allocations for nearly every municipality in the state of North Carolina. I was looking it up. We have a city of Charlotte, for example, that's getting like $140 million in ARPA federal relief money. And then the town of Orem, which I think is in Robeson County, is getting like 30,000. So, it gives you an idea of the wide breadth of the different amounts of money. But what we at NC Child have been saying is, let's utilize this as an advocacy opportunity. How can we go in and talk to elected leaders, work with others in our community about what's really needed to help our children and families during this time? What are the programs at the local level that could be supplemented? Are there ways, in addition to just taking care of the nuts and bolts and making sure our schools are safe and things like that, are there other programs or things that we could implement with ARPA funds that could help move our communities forward? So I just wanted to mention that because it's a huge factor within the landscape here in North Carolina now. The other thing I just wanted to mention, and I'm sure most everybody on this webinar is familiar with this, but I felt like it was worth revisiting, is that North Carolina, not all states do this, but North Carolina has a county administered social services system. So while we have state oversight and administration of social services, our social services departments all are locally run, essentially. And we have a 100-county DSS system. And this can obviously, as you might imagine, create some differences in how different programs are implemented and standards of care, et cetera. And while you can talk about some positive things that can come from local control and flexibility, et cetera, I think what we've also seen is that there is a need for some standardization and increased accountability for these services throughout the state. And we've actually seen that reflected in some national scores that we've gotten back related to our child welfare system and other areas that have not been very good scores, quite frankly, for North Carolina, and have shown a need for making some changes. And so North Carolina lawmakers have passed legislation over the past few years that would try to increase the accountability and standardize this even more. I'm not going to purport to be an expert on all the ins and outs of that. And I think there's others on the call that have far more insight here than I do, but that's just something I wanted to give everyone a heads up about, of course, because you're all advocates that are working with a lot of these county systems as well. Do we have another question?
We do, Adam. The first question, we just had another one pop up, but the first one is, I imagine it's hard to say not having access to the current budget proposal, but how hopeful are you that the governor will agree to or allow the current budget to move forward? And it says, I think you said the House or Senate have come to agreement. It's on its way to the governor now, but could be wrong. How does this in-between position impact advocacy efforts?
Good question. And it's a little bit of uncharted territory. Like I said, normally, so yes, the governor has the legislature's approved budget proposal right now. And I don't know, I'm not privy to the inner workings of that, but I imagine that, you know, he and his staff are rifling through it to see what are all the things that have been included in that, what are their priorities that are not in there, and they certainly are going to be having that conversation, mainly with the leaders of the legislature. And this is something that I think, you know, needs to be said, that this is not exactly, when you get to this point, there could be more transparency and more inclusion. Let me just say that. We have very few people that at the end of the day are kind of sitting around in the room and making some of these decisions. That's the way the system is currently working. Sure, people have input into what needs to be in the budget. Constituents talk to their legislators. Legislators run that up the chain, you know, within the legislature and try to get things included into the budget and all that good stuff. But the reason I say all that is that it's a little unclear when you come to the end of these situations sometimes on what is the most effective advocacy. What we at NC Child have basically tried to do is continue to talk about the priorities that we feel like are needed to most help children and families here in the state of North Carolina, especially from a race equity and from a standpoint of who's been most impacted by the pandemic. So what I would say is continue to stand on those principles, talk to, you know, currently we could send an email to the governor's office, to the legislative leadership, Speaker Moore and Senator Berger and your own legislators, and say, hey, we really hope that this ends up in a final compromise budget. But I think this is, at the end of the day, I don't know what is going to happen. I think that everyone wants to find some kind of full budget solution, and probably if that's what we'll come out with, and there'll be a lot of people happy and a lot of people unhappy on both sides, because if it happens, it's truly going to have to be some kind of compromise.
Thank you, Adam. And I have one other question / comment. It says, so COVID-19 money allotments are not based on how the county has been impacted, because Robeson County has continued to be significantly adversely impacted by COVID.
That's a good question. I don't understand all of the allocation methodology. Let me just say that. I do think that some, at least from what I understand with the money coming down to the school district, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, has to do with poverty levels and the percentage of children on free and reduced lunch. And there is some scaling that takes place there. But beyond that, I am not exactly sure.
All right, thank you, Adam. Those are the 2 questions in the Q&A.
You're welcome. See if I can get my slides to move again. Yay. All right. So needless to say, getting to know your legislators and other policymakers is very important, and relationships matter. So something I always talk to advocates about is, you know, you can be steadfast, and you should be, in what you think, are needed for your community, the issues you're passionate about, but building a solid relationship with your policymakers, whoever they are, is going to hopefully go a long way in you becoming a more effective advocate. And again, a lot of this goes back to some of the basics of educating the legislator or policymaker in good faith about, hey, this is the issue. This is what we're seeing happen in the community, et cetera. Creating that trust and offering assistance. Sometimes you can be a resource to your state legislator who, quite frankly, doesn't have as much of an understanding about an issue as you do, or hasn't been privy to some of the local conversations or things like that. And then, also trying to find that balance where you are taking enough time and having your voice heard, but you want to be an effective advocate in that way, and becoming and asking at the right time and using that in a strategic way, I guess, more or less. And I think it's also important to understand that there's a lot of times that you may not see eye to eye necessarily. And that in those times, especially, is when you have to really start thinking strategically about how can we build enough power in our community by working together with others, bringing in unlikely allies, whatever the case may be, to move this issue forward and to make something happen, because unfortunately it's not going to be as easy as we would hope. So that's just something I wanted to point out as well. One other thing we like to talk about at NC Child is thinking about the right tactic at the right time. First of all, it's important to have a working strategy. And I know I keep going back to that and talking about it, and I just don't have enough time here in this session to go into deep detail, but it is very important to be looking at the strategy. In our toolkit, we've got an outline for a strategy chart. That's something you can look at that helps ask some of those questions. But once you've settled on a strategy, then thinking about what are the things we can do as advocates that will have the greatest impact, that we've got the capacity to do, and figuring those out can go a long way. A lot of people are busy. A lot of folks don't have time to go to Raleigh for a day, for example, but they can do a lot of other things. So there are a variety of ways that people can have an impact. And the one that I circled there, because I've just found this to be a tried and true method of having an issue heard and moving things forward, is having a good old-fashioned one-on-one meeting or small group meeting with your legislator or other elected official in their home district. I just really believe in the power of these. I think the first one I did of these was with a few folks in Gaston County and Representative John Bridgman back in the late 90s. And you had folks sitting down and talking, and you could just really see how the issue was gaining traction because there was a back and forth. The advocates were able to clearly kind of say, okay, here's the point we're trying to make and what we would like to see happen. At that point in time, what we were trying to do is get a legislator to sign on as a co-sponsor of a bill. And after having that conversation and having a few people in the room that legislator listened to or respected, they did sign on as a bill co-sponsor. So I just think that can be an effective way that doesn't take a whole lot of capacity, but they can have a big impact. And of course, there's all kinds of creative ways that you can have an impact as well. Let's see if we have another question.
We have two more questions. One is in the chat. How will decisions be made in the judicial system about Leandro if the budget is unknown at this time?
Again, not a lawyer, not a legal expert on this, but I don't know. I think that this is going to probably take on a larger sort of constitutional meaning or battle in the courts, because if a judge is saying you must do this and the legislature is saying, well, we're not going to do this per your recommendation, then what are the repercussions there? I do know I read an article where similar scenarios have played out in other states. And again, at the end of the day, it didn't come to a situation where that judge mandating something to the legislature made it happen in that way in a clear fashion, as you might see or expect in other judgments through judges. That might happen to you and I personally, right? If a judge says, well, this is what you got to do, then either you do that or there's some serious consequences. I think because the way this involves the different branches of government and constitutional issues, et cetera, it's going to be less clear cut than that. Let me just say that. It will be fascinating to see how this budget emerges. And if it doesn't meet those standards, what the judge says on October 18th, and we go from there. I really don't know the answer.
These are excellent questions, you all. Keep them coming. There's also one in the Q&A that is, can you talk about a bit about how we can bring community members and families along to work on advocacy? What kinds of strategies work to get family voice to the table?
Yes. So I think that first and foremost, we as advocates, those, that are interested in participating in this, I think listening to community members and connecting with them and talking about how we can build common solutions or come up with advocacy strategies together is very important. Because through that listening process, I actually think that not only do we hopefully help empower more family members and community members, but that we come up with the best solutions. And I'm sure that a lot of our legislators and maybe those that are joining us on the panel, they can probably give numerous examples where a constituent has come to them with an idea or something that needed to happen, and it made a lot of sense, and they took action on that. So I think that's really important. I think that we also, though, have to be very cognizant of the barriers that family members and others might have to participation. So, people have jobs. A lot of times people have 2-3 jobs. We have to know how to work with them in their busy schedules. We got to be able to meet people where they're at, be flexible with the way we're having meetings and gathering information and trying to include people to the best of our ability. And I think it's real important that we take that seriously and really try to do the best we can.
Excellent. Thank you, Adam. I think those are the only questions that we have right now.
Okay. Move my slide forward. All right. And then, the last thing that I just wanted to mention, and again, I'm not going to get deeply into this, and I will certainly can leave this conversation to our esteemed honorables if they want to discuss this more during the panel. But we are undergoing redistricting here in the state of North Carolina. And this is a process that every 10 years after the census is done, as it was done in 2020, all the states across the country have to go through a redistricting process. And not only at the legislative level, this happens at the county level and the city level, because we have to reapportion the districts based on how populations have shifted and changed, et cetera. There might be thousands more people living in Gaston County than there were 10 years ago, who knows? And so you've got to figure all of that out. And it is the power of our state legislature to make those decisions, and so there's been public hearings across the state of North Carolina, input is gathered, GIS mappers are put into action, there's all kinds of things that happen there, but ultimately it's the legislature's duty to approve redistricting maps that they see fit. And this is a process that has been going on throughout time in the state of North Carolina. I remember back in the late 90s talking to Senator Ham Horton and Senator Ellie Kinnaird and others about, hey, what about independent redistricting and things like this? So it's a long-term subject. But, this is the way the process works now. The governor cannot veto the legislative maps. And there is, unfortunately, a long history of court battles in our state that happen along these redistricting lines. I mean, I think the bottom line, again, is that obviously we want the idea of everyone being fully represented in a way that represents their communities well and resembles the diversity of North Carolina and how we want to see our state moving forward. As best we can put that down on legislative maps, I think that's common ground that hopefully we'd all like to see. The other thing I'll mention is we are going to have an additional congressional district because North Carolina continues to grow and be one of the great states that a lot of folks want to move to. We're growing. And so now after the next election, I suppose we'll have 14 congressional districts instead of 13. So that's something to keep an eye on and how those districts will play out. And that process, it's my understanding that I think even next week, the legislature is starting to move even more with more fervor on some of these redistricting discussions. So there's really no break between what has been the legislative session and now getting into the redistricting. It's kind of like one's flowing into another. Last thing I'll say, and I'm about done with my time, is we certainly invite everyone to join our nonpartisan North Carolina Child Advocacy Network. You can just go online and sign up for our email list. We try to, again, just keep people apprised of key issues that we think are important to children and families across the state of North Carolina. And we are we even have local chapters or hubs. We're growing as an organization, and so we have local child advocacy networks in places like Wayne County and Guilford County and Western NC and New Hanover County. And so we're really doing our best to try to connect with people at the local level and hear their voices and hopefully bring that policy up, those policy ideas up to the state legislative level. To share those good ideas. And last thing I would say is if you haven't done it, contact your state legislator and just talk to them about an issue. Write them an email, leave them a phone message, and just introduce yourself. And you'll hear back from them, and you'll get their insight, and hopefully that begins to build a working relationship that you can have with that legislator as long as they feel like they want to keep serving North Carolina in this capacity or keep getting reelected to do so. So with that, I am going to stop my share and maybe see if there's any final questions.
I think that we have time for one more because we're into, we were going to go take a break, but the one that's in the chat is how will decisions be made in the judicial system about Leonardo if the budget is unknown at this time?
So there's a couple. I am going to defer that perhaps to Representative Torbett's given me the X on that, but to our legislative members, Representative Moray and Hunt and Representative Torbett, because there's a couple different ways that's essentially moved. There's the courts, there's the budget, and so maybe there could be more insight there.
And there is a question in the question and answer, but if we have time at the end, we will get to that if that's fine with you, Adam, or we'll share, if you will share your information in the chat, maybe that individual can reach out to you directly.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. And thank you so much for having me. I hope that some of this is helpful to folks, and I'll put my info in the chat. I encourage, please reach out to us at NC Child at any time.
Thank you so much, Adam. That was wonderful information, and thank you so much. So at this point, we'd like to give you guys a break, and just due to all the information that we're receiving and in the essence of time, we're going to take a 6-minute break. We'll be back here at reconvene at 10:20 and go ahead and we'll get started with our parent voice keynote, and then finish up with our panel discussion. So we'll be back here at 10:20. Welcome back, everyone. We hope you enjoyed a short little break. We've had some phenomenal speakers this morning. We're going to move into the second half of our Policy Institute. I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Renita Webb, Parent Advisory Council Manager at NC Child, Educational Leadership Strategist, author and founder of the Refining Life for Today's Parent Voice keynote. Dr. Webb, I will turn it over to you.
Hello, 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 everyone. I hope everyone is having a wonderful morning thus far. I am Dr. Renita Webb, and thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I am honored to be here with you to share about parent advocacy today. Parent advocacy. And I have a question for you all, you parents out there. My question to you today is, are you an advocate or an adversary? Are you an advocate or an adversary? So I'll start off by telling you this. She could have died. She could have died. About 10 and a half years ago, I picked up this beautiful baby girl of mine, and she wasn't breathing. I mean, literally, she was completely limp. I was a new mom. I owned 2 children that I did not birth. I was stepmom, but you know, my boys never call me stepmom. I'm their mom. But brand new mom, fresh baby. She was 3 weeks old, and I picked her up, and she was completely limp. I freaked out. I was screaming at the top of my lungs for my husband, screaming, 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 and bless my boys, bless them. All they said, because apparently he couldn't hear me, was like, "Dad, Mom wants you for something." I am literally screaming at the top of my lungs. What in the whole world? But eventually he came up the steps. He was in nursing school at the time. And by the time he got upstairs, the baby, you know, she started coming to. She opened her eyes, and he was like, Are you sure she wasn't breathing? No, honey. She was limp. She was a rag doll. And so since he was in nursing school, he took her vitals. He was like, "She seems okay." We called the pediatrician office. This was a Sunday, so of course they did not answer. I left them a message. We're awaiting their call back. In that time, we called another friend of ours who happened to be a pediatrician. And she asked us if we were already at the ER. And I said, no. And she said, well, if she's, you know, looking at you, everything's okay. You know, if anything else happens, go straight to the ER, call me later. Hours went by. We never got a call back from the pediatrician's office. And she goes out again. She was completely awake. She like passed out. I screamed for my husband. We head to the ER. We find ourselves in the ER in triage. They don't know what's wrong. We go, we get admitted. We're there for 3 days. They still don't know what's wrong. But at that point, my parental advocacy skills kicked in, and I started asking questions. I said, "Excuse me, can we talk about what's this? I understand that you are not sure what's going on, except for the fact that I was not crazy. She was not breathing. What else can we do? Can we get a sleep study?" And they said, "Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because that's exactly what we'd like to do, but we can't do it here." So they had to transfer her to another hospital. We go to that hospital, and we're there for 2.5 weeks. They can't figure out what's going on, except for the fact, they can't figure out the why. They can't figure out the what. She was having central apneas, and she would just stop breathing. At one point in time, she was stopping breathing more times than there were seconds in a minute. She was stopping breathing at 70 times in a minute. And that is absolutely insane for a little baby. And we figured out the what, but never figured out the why. And we find ourselves going home with the baby on oxygen. She had a monitor, and we lived like that for 2 years. And all of a sudden, it stopped. But as a parent, I stayed on top of it. I never left the hospital. I take that back. I left one time for 30 minutes because they made me leave. And then I came back. But as a parent, I was not going to leave her side. As a parent, I was going to ask a lot of questions. And as a parent, I was going to make requests, because I was advocating for a child who could not advocate for herself. And the next scenario, side note, she's 10 now and doing well. But the next story I have for you is that she could have failed, or she could have faded. She could have failed, or she could have faded. Same child years later in a classroom where she was being treated different. She was not being pushed to her full potential, and she was being brushed aside. And if I, as a parent, had not stepped in, she could have failed, or she could have faded. I also had to find ways to figure out what was really going on fully and present it in a way where I would be heard. Because I also could have gone in there screaming and yelling. Did none of those things. She did not fail. She did not fade, because she had an advocate there for her and ready to protect her and keep her going on the path where she needed to go. So my question today to you, once again, is, are you an advocate or an adversary? Why is this right? Why is this important to me? It's important to me because Martin says parental advocacy is the single most important thing that can improve the quality of life for your child with special needs. I venture to say parental advocacy is the single most important thing that can improve the quality of life for your child, period. Children need champions. Children need champions. And I think that one of the most important champions can be those that birth them, those that care for them, those that take watch over them, their caretakers, their parents, their guardians. We should know them best, though that is not always the case. There's something to be said about being a voice for the voiceless, about being the eyes and ears for those who have limited use of theirs, not particularly because they're disabled, but just because they haven't lived enough life to know how to use them properly. But we must remember that there's a thin line between advocacy and becoming an adversary. Advocacy is leadership. Advocacy is leadership. And if any parents out there today, anybody who works with parents out there today, have not recognized that simply being a parent puts you in a position of leadership, welcome. Welcome. Every single parent has the opportunity to be an effective and change-making leader. You have a life that has been entrusted to you. Every guardian, because sometimes we don't recognize the guardians. The guardians sometimes are those parents when the birth parents may not be parents. You have a position of leadership that can make or break. It can make or break. So here are a few things that I want to look at, a few tips that I want you to look at as we are moving forward in our parental advocacy. The first tip is get to know those involved in making the decisions for your children. Get to know them, build the relationships. The saying that it takes a village to raise a child or to train a child, or however you want to look at it, it is true. It is about more than just the parent. It is about more than just the parent. There are a tribe of people who surround your child and who make decisions for them, whether it be their teachers, their doctors, even lawmakers. Get to know them. Figure out some things about them, and if you can, build relationships, because you should be working together as a team to make the best decisions for those children. Lead that if you can. Once again, the parent should be the most knowledgeable about the kid, but know that there's some things that these other people know that you may not know, and you need to work together to make sure you are making the best decisions for this child. The second thing is to keep records. Keep records. I'm an educator, so I think about document. Parents, you need to have your documentation. Write it down if you can, because sometimes when you go into spaces and you have to fight for certain things for your kids, you will have to have the documentation to prove that it's needed. Because if you don't, I promise you the other entities will. Think about doctor medical records. They have documentation. Think about schools. Those teachers have documentation. And your legislatures, they have documentations about the things and information and data that they could have collected for them. They have documentation. You should as well. I'm telling you, it will make a difference as you go to advocate for your children. The third thing is gather info and communicate effectively. Gather information. You have to have your records, you have to have your receipts, but you also need to figure out what other people know and have that in your pocket as well. So gathering information is going to require you to use your senses. You're going to need to use your hearing and your seeing. Your hearing and your seeing. And you need to hear what other people have to say. You need to see what is happening in a situation. And you need to do these things before you use the power of your voice. Hear and see, then speak. So when you gather this information, then you will have those things that you need to say in order to communicate effectively. Please, parents, do not ever walk into a room starting with a yell. As a former school administrator, I will tell you that those moments, I immediately stopped listening because I couldn't hear what you had to say. In the yelling, your voice is not heard. Don't allow your frustration to take over so that you're no longer effective. If nothing else, think about how you like to hear. Do you like to hear when people are yelling at you? I do not think so. But this comes with one thing, control. Control. Can you self-control? Can you self-regulate enough so that you can be heard in a room, so that you can be effective in a space? I want you to remember here that you cannot control anything or anyone else around you. The only you that you can control is you. So walk into spaces and places in the power of control of self so that you can be effective in that space and really make a positive change or difference for your child. The fourth thing is to be honest and focus on the big picture. Sometimes as parental advocates, we forget the real things about our children. We know what they do. We know what they don't do. And we do not need to walk into different places and spaces and expect that those things are different. Yes, sometimes our children behave very different in different spaces, but you have to know what you know about your kid. Be honest about that. If your kid talks a lot, I have a talker. If your kids talk a lot, you may expect that when they go to school, they're going to still talk. They may not talk the first day of school. They may not talk the second day of school, but by the 26th day of school, they may have gotten more comfortable. And maybe they're chatty Cathy's all over again. Be honest about that. And don't go fighting and say, oh, no, my child does not do that. Yes, they do. And you know it. But you also know their strengths. Maybe they're very inquisitive because they have lots of things that they want to learn. And maybe that's causing them to ask a lot of questions. But sometimes you have to advocate for the fact, allow my child to ask the question so they can get the answers they need so they can go do the amazing things that they are going to do. Be honest about that, but focus on the big picture. Where do you really want this to go? What are your real goals? Do you have goals? Do your children have goals? In your advocacy, that honesty should push you towards the goals that you have for your kids and allow you all as a team, the school, the doctor, the whoever, to work together to get to those goals. Be honest first and then focus on the big picture. And finally, emphasize solutions and involve the child. Involve the child. This is a moment where empowerment comes into play. So you want to have a solution in mind. You want to be solution focused, but that goes back to having those goals. You can't have a solution to nothing. If you don't have a goal, the solutions won't make sense because then you'll just be creating solutions and it has nothing to do with where you really want to go. But it goes back to that whole Diana Ross thought. Do you know where you're going to? Do you like the things that life is showing you? Where are you going to? Do you know? Do you know? If you don't know where you're going, if you don't know where your child wants to go, then you could be creating solutions for something that is going to take them in the opposite direction of where they should be. Why are we involving the children? Really, this has to do with leadership once again. Good leaders should always, always, always be succession planning. That means preparing the next person who's going to take your place. Good leaders aren't afraid of that because good leaders have other places to go and other things that they want to do. They have their own goals. Your children should be a part of the succession and legacy of your life. Eventually, you want them to be able to do this process for themselves. Thus, they need to be involved in the process so they can see how it goes. Empower them to eventually one day use the voice that they have. Even if that voice may be utilized differently, because maybe you do have a child who has disabilities. Maybe they will never be able to fully walk or do things on their own, and they will always need to have stronger support, but it doesn't mean that if they do have a voice that can be heard, that they can't use it in some way. Prepare them for their future by allowing them to be a part of their present. So the question is, how does all this tie to what I do now? As the Parent Advisory Council Manager for NC Child, I help to empower other parents with this same process. I help to support them because I used to be one of them. I help to support them in the processes of speaking up, allowing their voices to be heard, and empowering others in their community to do the same. So I am so excited about the parents and the guardians and those connected to those parents and guardians here today, helping to empower them with the same knowledge, to help them to build those relationships and get to know those who are making decisions their children's lives, to help them remember to keep records and have the evidence they'll need, to help them gather information and to communicate effectively, to be honest and focus on the big picture, and at the end of the day, emphasize solutions and involve their children to empower them to be their own advocates and maybe one day to be parent advocates of children of their own in the future. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to this amazing group today. And I hope that this is helping fill your toolbox so you can be amazing advocates for our children in the future. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Dr. Webb. That was amazing. Thank you for helping us think and challenging us and then giving us the 5 tips to be effective advocates. We really appreciate it. It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now at this time, we'll be transitioning into our panel discussion. And today's panelists are Representative Marsha Moray from District 30, Durham County. Judge Moray has served 2.5 terms in the NC and North Carolina House. Representative David Willis from District 68, Union County. Representative Willis is in his first term in the North Carolina House. Representative John Torbett from District 108, Gaston County. Representative Torbett is in his 6th term as representative in the North Carolina House. And Representative Rachel Hunt from District 103, Mecklenburg County. Representative Hunt is in her 2nd term in the NC House, North Carolina House. Both Malia Rose Waters, Policy Director at Prevent Child Abuse North Carolina, and I will be moderating today's panel. We will do our best to get through all the questions that were provided to us prior to, as time allows. Please remember that during this panel, when you put your comments and your questions in the chat, that this panel is focusing on advocacy at the state level. So please remember that when placing your comments and questions in the chat. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for being on here today, panelists. So the first question is pretty painless and easy. So to get us started, we're gonna have you briefly, in 1 minute or so, tell us a bit about what you do and how you got involved in state advocacy. And anybody can start, or I can call on someone. So Representative Torbett, you are first on my screen, so we'll start with you.
Thanks. Hey, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. Let me see. It is morning. Absolutely right. Can't ever tell what time it is in Raleigh. We're working around the clock pretty much. But hey, it's great to be here. Thank you for asking me to be here. Just if you want to know about me, I'll just save a lot of time. You can go to www.johntorbett.com and find my whole history is out there. But specifically dealing with child advocacy, it began when I was a county commissioner some years ago in Gaston County. I served there for 8 years as county commissioner, where I was really kind of up close and personal with the Department of Health and Human Services at the local level and dealing with some of the foster kids and the foster parents. I then saw absolutely the need to expand the program because we had nowhere near the parents we had, and we had way too many kids in the program. That was heartbreaking. And so we worked feverishly to try to increase and make it more user friendly, if you would, for foster parents. That led to coming up here in Raleigh and following it through some legislation that we'll talk about later in the day. But yeah, number one, it breaks my heart having the kids that are in the program. But number two, we really have to do whatever we can to expand the availability of parents that are willing to give their love and their time and their energy to these kids that just need it by so very much. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you for being here. All right, Representative Moray, you are next on my screen.
Good morning, everyone. And I really appreciate what Leslie Boney said at the very beginning, that he really liked Band-Aids, because I apologize. This is not from being in the minority. It feels like it sometimes, but this is from sun cancer. So tell all your kids to wear sunscreen. It's great to be here. I would say my local advocacy started with my first job as an assistant DA. And I was in juvenile court, And we kept thinking kids listen to kids more than they do adults. So we started a teen court and went to the DA and went to the county commissioners and how do we get kids involved? And it was just a great collaboration of an idea to start this in Durham, and then the rest of the state followed with some of the teen courts. But I think, you know, every step where you are, when I became a judge, we started a misdemeanor diversion court. And once again, it was going to a prosecutor and going to the police chief and the sheriff. And how can we help these kids not get arrested? And, you know, we all came together and just started a novel program. So going over to the legislature, you know, I think we take our passion of where we have been, who we have listened to, and the role of, you know, people who are on the ground working with kids. Those are the advocates that we can learn from and listen to. Great to be with you. Thanks.
Thank you for being here. And Representative Hunt, you are next.
Hello, good morning. I am so happy to be with you all. I follow this group closely. My sister is a school social worker. I served as a domestic law attorney for many years. And before that, I actually did volunteer work as the resident manager at a battered women's shelter. So I have lived with and seen the effect of early childhood ACEs and what happens to those children and how it's a lifelong traumatic and negative, all the effects that are associated with it. So I could not believe any more in what you all are doing. So those are the two ways I got started. Also, of course, my dad, as Governor Hunt, constantly talked, as well as my mom, about how important early childhood and all of childhood is to a person's well-being and success in life. So that combination made me extremely interested in this topic. I'm so glad to be here today. Thank you so much for asking me, and we'll talk some more later.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. And Representative Willis.
Hi, good morning. I've been in the early childhood education field for the last 11 years, and I've been a parent for the last 14. And so my own children really are the ones that got me involved and got me kind of in the path of advocacy and fighting for children. I've served on the PTO board of our schools. You know, I've been very active in the foster care system here in Union County and in Charlotte area, and trying to help, you know, bring attention and support and resources to that area. And I think it's just something that we, as John mentioned earlier, you know, these children just deserve everything that we can provide for them. And we need more families involved. We need more, you know, folks in Raleigh involved in this fight. And, you know, we're just here to do what we can to help the children across North Carolina.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to turn it over now to Malia to ask the next question.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I will start with you, Representative Hunt. For many people on today's institute, they may not have met with or engaged with their state legislator before, and they're here today to learn more about how to do that. You've recently been holding a series of virtual listening sessions with other members from the Mecklenburg delegation from the General Assembly. What have people been sharing with you as their concerns in those sessions? And how do these listening sessions and other events like this with your constituents impact how you go about your work in the General Assembly?
Thank you for the question. We like nothing better than meeting with constituents. I know you may not believe that, but it is true. If you cannot come to Raleigh and meet with us in our office or on the phone or Zoom, we will meet with you in the district. There is nothing we want to do more than that, because we like to meet face-to-face if possible and safely. We also have these listening sessions, like she mentioned. Those are so people can come and just tell us their concerns. And many of those have to do with healthcare issues, expansion of Medicaid, why we haven't been able to get that done in the state has been a big question. People have asked all about different issues concerning children, how we can increase education funding, how we can raise teacher pay. People also ask about safety. They also ask about transportation. So it's anything that is on the constituent's mind. The listening sessions are just that, only listening. We do not give answers to the questions, but that can be done when you come individually. So that's why we love having also town halls. Town halls are where we do give answers to questions. So we'll be doing a series of these after the budget process is over to explain what happened. And that should be in the next, we hope, month or so. So, we really do want to hear, though, if there is something you are interested in, if there's something you want us to help write a bill about, that's another thing you can do. But please feel free, call, write, by email. We really, really want to see you all and talk to you. Do not be afraid to do that. We all have LAs that were mentioned earlier. We work in our offices every day, answering the phone and answering our emails. And so we are readily accessible. But like I said, if you can't come to Raleigh, we are happy to meet with you in the district. I've even met with folks in some other districts. So whatever you need, we want to hear about it and we want to help you. That's what we're here for. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Stacey, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Representative Willis, this question is for you. This is your first term in the North Carolina House, and you are the new member leader. Can you tell us about your first term so far in this role of the new member leader and how you balanced constituent bill requests, projects you are passionate about, and working with other new members and not so new members on legislative items?
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a pleasure and an honor really to be serving in the North Carolina House. This is my first term. I've been following closely what's going on in North Carolina really for the last 4 or 5 years and have been engaged in committee work and advocacy work during that time. And my predecessor, Craig Horn, here in Union County was a big mentor for me and helped me learn as he was going through this process, and obviously was very heavily involved in education during that time. Being the new member leader, I feel like my responsibility is to help them, have and open the same doors, build the same relationships, get to know the process and help fight for them with the needs that they have for specific bills or needs that they have for their districts as well. So it goes beyond just, what I do in my district. And the balancing piece can be a bit of a challenge, obviously, as a father of 3 as well, still trying to figure that part of it out. But we love what we do, and fighting for the people of North Carolina, fighting for the things that we need, especially the children, whether it's education or foster care, whatever it may be. We've been working very hard this term, and we continue to do so. I mean, obviously, one of the things when you're talking about education is it's not a short-term solution, and any of the issues dealing with children, it takes a much longer strategic focus. And so looking beyond just this session, what are we doing and what are we starting to build the stepping stones for to get more work done down the road as well. And so just been an honor to be a part of this group and work with folks like Chairman Torbett and Ashton Clemens and I, who sits on the other side of the aisle, have partnered together in the Early Childhood Caucus. And so being able to work across the aisle and work with amazing folks across the state has been a real pleasure.
Awesome. So kind of like a balancing act that we all try to figure out as we move along, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Malia?
Representative Torbett, my next question is for you. You've talked about how much you enjoy meeting with constituents over the years and listening to their concerns. A lot of that is also shared on your website that you mentioned earlier, and that many of these concerns were drafted into legislation and have become laws, proving that people who advocate for issues they care about can make a difference. Wondering if you could share with us an example of a constituent concern that was shared with you that inspired legislation.
Certainly. Thank you for that question. Some years back, a need or a concern was brought to me by some foster parents there in Gaston County saying that I won't go into detail of the thing, but let's say these parents had kids for a long period of time, foster kids, and they were serving well, obviously loving their kids. And honestly, in the middle of the night, late in the evening, Department of Health and Human Services, for whatever reason, came to the house, removed the kids, and they went to another home. And involving into that, there was no really reasoning behind that was sufficient, I guess, to say something needed to be looked at. This was something wrong. If parents are offering the love and the attention and the financial support needed to raise kids, especially when they're not their own kids, that we really need to give them some credibility. We need to help them understand that we have their backs and we can support them. So I said, how can I best do that? Because I understood they did not have a seat at the table anywhere. That is the foster parents, when they are probably the most important, significant support piece of the puzzle. The child always being first. And so I developed some legislation that was the foster care ombudsman, which it was a pilot program for Gaston County, which gave the parents a seat at the table when it came to the decision making of the child, always holding the child first, always first and foremost child, but also giving the parents some opportunity and trying to get rid of some of those worst case scenarios that we hear about. We don't hear about all the wonderful things that go on typically, but we always hear about the worst case scenarios and try to address some of those. That legislation passed. It was enacted in Gaston County for a couple of years. My understanding, it went well. It kind of like brought light to the focus and the need that foster parents should have some say and should have some dealings when it comes to the best outcomes for those children that they serve. That was a pretty defining moment there, and I was very proud of that piece of legislation. That's just one. Some other piece of legislation coming just this season, just this session. I was speaking to a Charlotte police officer that decided to call me. He just called, and we worked on some legislation that removed the chance for someone to skim your number off your plastic card and use your bank account without you knowing about it. So we got that passed. Governor was kind enough to sign that piece of legislation. It's now law, and now hopefully those people will reap what they sow and get some severe jail time for trying to go in and access funds that they had no dealings working for or raising, but were coming into your bank account, for example. That's just two brief things. There's been several more, but I'll move on. But thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. It just drives home the point how important is the voice of the constituents, and how it can have a big impact. So thank you for sharing those examples.
Not a problem. The most important voice is that of the constituents. That's what we do. That's why we do what we do, for that and the kids. So.
Great. Thank you. Stacy?
All right, Representative Morey, this question is for you. As the co-captain of the U.S. Women's Olympic Swim Team, you witnessed other athletes who were winning races due to suspected drug use, which was later found to be the case. That sparked a fire in you to go to law school, where you then went on to be an attorney, a judge, and a district court judge. From there, you retired your judicial robes to become a legislator in the state house. Many people on our institutes may be encountering their own personal unjust experiences, or may work with families who are treated unfairly by a system. How can they find their spark to become their own advocate or others' advocates, or an advocate in general?
Wow, you went back into ancient history there. And this weekend I talked to a group of age group swimmers, and I said probably the best thing that happened to me was not coming out as a medal winner at the Olympics, because I think it gives you empathy, it gives you more understanding of disappointment and defeat, but also the cheating was very profound. And I think that's why I went into law, and you fight for fairness, you fight for justice. And I think there's a choice people have. You can be defeated by a bad act or a tragedy, or you can rise above it and work and fight to help others never go through that circumstance. And so, I think that's what, our keynote speaker was saying, Dr. Webb, that, is it adversary or do you become an advocate? And I think the big thing that I had to learn was I was an individual athlete. I was a swimmer. Now in the legislature, I cannot be such an individualistic person. It's a team event. And, to work with Representative Torbert, Representative Willis across the aisle, that's what it takes. And it's taken me a while to really learn that relationships matter, and to get, what is so important to your values, to sit down. And we may not see eye to eye, but just the understanding, the history where we come from, I think, can raise us all and get common ground. Legislation is never a straight line. It is very wavy, and oftentimes, you know, from the beginning point to the end point is very different, the sausage making. But developing these relationships, and I would just go back to anyone who is a constituent or an advocate, as Representative Hunt said, come talk to us. You know, don't be intimidated, don't be hesitant. We work for you. We all put our pants on one leg at a time. We are all the same, and we are all working to make North Carolina better.
So I have one follow-up question, because there's a question in the chat that you indicated to, and it says, if we want to contact a representative about an issue and idea, should it only be the representative for our part of the state, or could we work with any representative who is interested in our cause? And that you hinted to that, so I'm going to let you answer that.
You know, even though we represent local districts, we deal with statewide issues. And we're all experts in some areas and not experts in other areas. And I think to find who the expert is in that area, if it's, you know, early childhood education, find out who the expert is. If you go to the ncledge.gov and look up committees and see who the chairs of the committees or members of the committee, that's a good way to start. Or contact your local legislator and ask him or her who would be the best legislator to talk to, because I think our decisions affect everyone statewide, and someone else may want to join in, but that would be my advice.
Does anybody else have any comment? I see a lot of head shaking and nodding. And
I think the judge is spot on. And just to be clear, Judge, I'm sure you could still set some records in a pool somewhere. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Malia, I'm going to turn it over to you. You're muted, Malia.
Oh, thank you. It was bound to happen, right? Representative Hunt, I'm going to come back to you now. Two bills that you've recently worked on, House Bill 420, the K-3 Reading and Literacy Improvement Act, would put much needed teaching assistants in classrooms from kindergarten through third grade, as well as the bipartisan House Bill 707, the Student Borrowers Bill of Rights, that would provide essential protections for student loan borrowers. Could you tell us more about the process and the motivations around these bills? Particularly, how have you engaged with stakeholders or partners or advocates as these bills were being written and went through the General Assembly?
Thank you for the question. I wish these bills had gone through the General Assembly. 420, the TA bill, I wrote back in my first term, and we refiled it this time. It was done specifically with only Democrats. So from that point, I learned that bills need to be bipartisan to get through any committees. So 707 is truly a bipartisan bill. I started learning about the TA and the need for TAs back when I was a child, because that's when my father was governor and he put TAs in every K-3 classroom. And we saw reading scores go up. So there is a direct link, and research has shown this, between reading scores and having TAs in classrooms. I also heard from so many teachers and teacher assistants about what a better quality of life they have and the children have in the classroom with TAs there. So that was we had a wonderful press conference. My mother came, as you all know, she's a teacher. So that was in my first term. That bill did not make it into any committee. So it stopped. 707, I did with Rep. Setzer, who's the chair of the Finance Committee, and Rep. Hardister from Guilford. They are both on the other side of the aisle, as my friends here are. And that bill, the Student Borrowers Bill of Rights, I am a college counselor in addition to being a legislator, and it would provide parameters similar to a mortgage lender around the lenders of student debt, student loans. We do not have any parameters right now. So, there's some bad actors, not a lot, but some, who do bad things to student lenders, like lie about the terms of the loan or change the terms and not tell the students. So we have a huge number of students in the state that are struggling with their debt load. You all probably know people. And then they're not able to do what they want to do for jobs. They're not able to buy homes or cars. Many have to live with their parents for an extended period. So I was just trying to make people's lives better. This is a bill that has been passed in many other states in the country, many that are led by Republican and Democratic legislatures. And it was brought to me from some advocates. So I did not start the bill, and we just tweaked it. It has gone through 2 committees. We have high hopes that it will continue moving through the House and then go over to the Senate. And it showed me, I really learned that in order to get bills to even come to committee, if you are in the minority party, you have to write bills with folks from the majority party on the bill. So I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Stacy, I'll go back to you.
All right, Representative Willis, we're going to circle back to you for a second question. You are the co-chair of the Early Childhood Caucus and the owner of small business that serves families. How did these experiences influence the policy that you advocate for within the General Assembly?
Well, as an owner and operator of a preschool for the last 11 years, I've seen firsthand the struggles that families have with a number of issues, whether it's just raising children or early education, jobs and parenting and all of that. And so trying to understand their needs and what we can really do within the confines of the state legislature, I think to me is really important that we advocate for them. And we've got a lot of folks in Raleigh, as was mentioned earlier, that have specialty in certain areas, but this may not be one of their areas. And so I've tried to be a voice for the parents, for the families in the foster care system and the early childhood system and education as a whole, and work with our leadership and folks across the aisle, as Representative Hunt just mentioned, in making sure that we focus on the needs that are there and the things that we can actually get accomplished. And I think when it comes to children and education and whether it be early childhood or K-12 or university, I mean, obviously the outcomes are what we're looking for. So early literacy, and then college and career readiness, and then them being able to find a useful program of study that will lead them into a successful career, I think is very important. And so trying to advocate and fight for bills that will help us and improve what we already have in North Carolina.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Malia?
Representative Torbett, as Appropriations Chair, you're heavily involved in the state budget process. Can you share with participants of the Institute ways to effectively advocate for budget items? And I think Adam touched on this a little bit in his presentation. Love to hear what your thoughts are on how to advocate for budget items.
Certainly, first and foremost, communicate. You have to let us know. You can, as my colleagues have said earlier, either let us know here in Raleigh, catch us in the district. If you want to call here in Raleigh, the office number here is 919-733-5868. We'll take your information and get back with you and try to aid and assist you in what your concerns are. That's pretty much the best way, I would say, to go about getting it. Emails, a lot of people like to use emails. Some people like to use organizational emails. And I'll be very honest with you, although those do get to us, we get those in thousands. So on any given day, I may open my email inbox and it will say 1,000, 2,000 emails. Oftentimes, those are emails that all of them are not going to see the light of day simply because they're generic, I guess. But we try to go through and scan them all and look at the ones that are most personalized and come directly from someone who has a concern. From any area of the state, I think was said by one of my colleagues as well, we're not relegated to just working on issues within the 108th district. Those are my folks, and I work to help them and aid and assist them in any way possible. But we also effectively work with our colleagues to provide the rest of North Carolina that aid and assistance needed. And as I tell everyone I go talk to, is that it's not one part of the state against another part of the state. It's not urban and rural. It is us against the other 49. So that's my that's the way I approach things.
Thank you. So calling is maybe the best way to get in touch, and then maybe email second best way to get in touch to express any concerns.
I just want people to understand email is a wonderful way to communicate, but we get so many of them. I know my colleagues would probably say the same thing, literally thousands and thousands a week. So you could have a full-time person doing nothing but calling emails. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
And could you mention, Representative Torbett, could you mention that phone number one more time, just in case those didn't get it when you first said it?
Be happy to. The office number here is 919-733-5868.
Thank you so much. All right, Representative Morey, this question is for you. In 1998, then Governor Jim Hunt appointed you as the executive director of the Governor's Commission on Juvenile Crime and Justice to reform North Carolina's juvenile justice system. During your tenure, juvenile crime rates were reduced by approximately 40%. Tell us a little about what influenced this large drop in crime.
Thanks, Stacy. It's kind of an interesting story, but back in the mid-90s, I was a prosecutor in Durham in juvenile court, and we had a horrific crime of a 13-year-old who bludgeoned to death a 90-year-old, and it made the headlines of newspapers across the state. And it was an example where a bad story that gains a lot of attraction in the news can carry policy. It was also the same time that John DeLilio coined the word super predator for kids in the mid-90s, and that we were facing a horrible wave of youth violence. Well, Governor Hunt was running for his fourth term, and his campaign was aware of all this media attention locally and nationally to these super predators. His campaign developed, let's stop these punks and thugs from destroying our cities. And when the governor was redoing the juvenile code, he asked me to be his director, and I went over and I said, I think the governor really needs to watch himself what happens in a juvenile court, that the story is just not a 13-year-old killing a 90-year-old. It's about thousands of kids every day that walk into a juvenile courtroom. And to Governor Hunt's credit, we went to Charlotte. He sat for 3 hours watching kids that were trespassing or skipping school out of the parents' control. And the judge sent 3 of them to training school, and the parents weren't there. And at that time in the late 1990s, our training schools had over 1,500 kids packed into our training schools. Legislators were looking to expand the number of training schools. But Governor Hunt, who watched these cases and realized the failings of the family, who realized a training school is not the place for a young person who is acting out, but counseling is, working with the family is. And even though many states went very punitive in their legislation, I think we did a very measured job in really looking at how serious, or is it a minor problem? How do we help these kids to do everything we can, not to institutionalize them, to keep them out of our training schools. And I certainly give the governor all the credit in the world. We totally reformed our juvenile justice system. As you said, rates went down 40%, and now we have fewer than 200 kids in our youth development centers, which were our training schools. So I think it was the commitment of someone, let's get beyond the headlines, let's go down and see how children are impacted, what we can do to help.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Malia?
So my next question is for all of you, and I think that all of you up until this point have probably touched on some things that fall under this question, but I'm hoping you can think of another example to share. So a common theme throughout these policy institutes has been that policy is not a sprint, but instead it's a marathon. Progress can seem very slow at times, and it's important to celebrate the victories along the way. So tell us about a policy win that you've had and what a win means for a legislator. Like, what does a win mean for you? It's not necessarily having a bill become a law. What are some other wins along the way? And I'll start with you, Representative Willis.
Thank you. I think, being probably the short timer here in the group today, I've had a couple of good wins in terms of bills that did become law, which is great for someone coming in, because it kind of helps you build that confidence that you're doing the right things and you're supporting work. I mean, we had the Foster Parent Bill of Rights that came through and the governor signed recently, and that was almost a unanimous vote on both the House and the Senate, and just fighting for parents out there, as John mentioned earlier, the parents who are giving of themselves and of their time to love these kids and to take them in as their own deserve, someone fighting for them, and they deserve to have, clarity around what their rights and responsibilities are as a parent in the foster care system. And so to me, that was a big win, but it's just a stepping stone, because we know our foster care system has a lot of needs. It's not going to be solved overnight. Obviously, this is, a multi-year, multi-term approach. I think we're going to have to take a look at, and I think we need to start laying the groundwork now. And we've already obviously been doing that, but making sure that the policy that we have and the research that we need to back up that policy and get support from advocacy groups, from parents in the field, from other legislators is laid out. So as we come into future terms, we've got the ability to continue to move the ball down the field and to help solve some of these long-term issues. And same thing with what you were just talking about with Representative Moray and the early or the childhood justice system. And I mean, none of that happens overnight, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of years to get that work in and to get it right. And I think we've got a lot of work that's in process, and you don't always see or hear about a lot of this, but a lot of it continues behind the scenes, and people continue to fight for what they feel is important to them. And I think, I'm looking to be, a member of the House for hopefully as long as they'll have me, and continue to fight for education and for children and families across North Carolina.
Great, thank you. Representative Hunt, what's a win that you have had?
So a win for me is less than getting a bill passed, because I haven't been able to do that, but I have been able to get people to work with me on, for instance, that 707, the Student Borrowers Bill of Rights, folks from the other side of the aisle. Also having these caucuses. I'm a member of the Early Childhood Caucus. Nothing is more important than early childhood. The return on investment, as we know, is between 11 and 17 to 1 in dollars. So we know if we put dollars there, we will get them back in a plethora of ways. So it's been great to work with folks from the House and the Senate. That's how the caucuses work. I'm also a member of the Biosciences Caucus, was on their Zoom earlier today. So anytime we can bring Republicans and Democrats, senators and House members together and listen to the experts from the field, that is a win, because we're all learning many things. One of the best things about being in the House for me is that it's like going back to college. I can learn about so many things that I knew nothing about. There's so many experts and folks like you all who are the people who are the experts and can tell us and help us learn so much. So thank you all for all your work. Please continue to inform us and help us make the best decisions for the people of North Carolina.
Great, thank you. Representative Moray, I know that you shared a pretty big win in the last question, but what's another win that you've had?
Well, this session, we raised the minimum age of juvenile justice jurisdiction, that we were the only state where 6-year-olds could be petitioned into juvenile court. And so I filed a bill. It did get to a committee, which was fabulous, but then a Senate bill incorporated some of it, and it was a Republican sponsored Senate bill. It passed both houses, the governor signed it, and that was a win. It doesn't take our name to be on it, but it was the right thing, and I think it was great for North Carolina's children.
Excellent. And Representative Torbett. Hang on one second, you're muted. There we go.
Is that better?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I said, I know she saved the senior citizen to last. Thank you for that. Let me tell you, I guess, number one, to get things passed up here, I come from a business background where things move at lightning speed to get, keep your business moving forward. And you have to make decisions on the fly and go. And none of that happens here. And it's often extremely frustrating that what we have grown up in an environment that we grew up in, and you come up here and everything just slows to an absolute crawl. But I will credit our founders that was purposeful, and it worked wonderful. And thank God that things don't work as fast as they do in, I guess, in the business world as they do in legislation. We'd be changing every day. With that, I think we have a rare and unique opportunity as legislators, and I think we need to oftentimes readjust our priorities to get back to that. We have the ability within a great mindset of individuals serving in the House and the Senate in North Carolina to address the issues of our time and to fix those issues. So one of the most frustrating things with me is that I'm talking now in my 11th year about issues and concerns I had in my first year. Folks, we got to work hard to solve these issues. My guess is there'll be other issues will come down the pike, but we really need to address the issues of our time and check the box and move on those other issues. One of those issues I was proud to get pushed through a couple of years ago was school safety after a heinous act at a school in the country. We went back and tried to raise the situational awareness of school safety within schools in North Carolina. Our schools are safe in North Carolina. I'm not trying to say they're not. We want to try to provide additional aid and assistance to help put those assets on the footprint of our schools, such as professional services in child psychology, nursing, those efforts out there that would help, I guess, put that safety barrier around our schools. And we were very successful. I was thrilled that some of the appropriation chairs of various entities, whether it be agriculture or whatever, actually offered up money to go towards school safety without being coerced or asked to or begging or anything. They just of their heart offer that up. And that's the first time I ever realized that. I think that has gone on. And we were able to accomplish some great, wonderful things about schools to address school safety. That is, I guess that's the one that makes me feel the best, being somewhat on the point or on the tip of the spear for that one. And we're still moving forward with that because that issue is not solved, but we can work towards that and hopefully solve. And that is an issue our time. If we can effectively address the issue of a child contemplating harming himself or others at an early point and help that child and bring that child to understand that his life is valuable and the lives of others are valuable, and we need that person here and to get the fruits of his labor throughout the rest of his life. If we can accomplish that right there, we've done yeoman's work. And if we catch it early enough, then just perhaps in 30 years, you won't have something similar to a Las Vegas shooter that happened a few years ago, because that individual didn't get the necessary aid and assistance he needed at a younger age. That's one of my goals. And that's one of the things I'll be working on somewhat feverishly. But once again, sometimes it gets frustrating for the pace that it takes to get things done. But as long as we're pushing the ball down the field, pardon the pun, is that we will accomplish great, wonderful things for people in North Carolina. And it's just an honor and privilege to serve.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that too, that as constituents, sometimes we may be frustrated at the pace. It's good to know that you're also frustrated, where it's like, I would like to see things happening a little bit faster. So it makes it more relatable and real, right? That we're all a little bit frustrated sometimes. So Stacy, I will pass it back to you for our final question.
All right, this final question is for everyone. So in closing, what advice would you give to advocates for children, youth, and families who would like to get involved in state advocacy? And, throughout the theme and thread of our questions, we've kind of hinted to this, but is there anything additional or anything that you would like to emphasize on that would stand out? And we're going to go backwards this time. So Representative Torbett, since you're already unmuted, we'll start with you.
Thanks. Yeah, I would highly recommend getting involved locally in any group or organization that supports foster children, or foster parenting, specifically foster parenting, because I'm saddened to know it appears that there's going to be a supply of children out there that need their services. But what I'm hearing is that we don't have enough parents to adequately address the need. So I would focus on that. And if there's not an organization to get to join in your local area, then by all means start one. It's not that hard. And let me explain why I say that. 200 some odd years ago, a very small group of individuals created a country that has grown to be the greatest country on the globe. So you can accomplish great, wonderful things with small amounts of individuals. And so I would encourage, if your area does not have a group that helps aid and assist either foster parents or foster kids, that you create one. If you need some help, give us a call and we'll hook you up with the right people. As I always call, there's a lot smarter people out there than me that can help with these things. So we'll hook you up with the right people. Thank you for putting us on today.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Representative Moray.
I agree totally with Representative Torbert, what he said. There's so many wonderful child advocacy organizations, even locally, your guardian ad litem, get with your DSS board, find out what area you're most interested, what touches your heart and your passion. NC Child represents, the plethora of child issues. So does the ACLU, disability rights. And unfortunately with COVID, a lot of people have stopped coming to the General Assembly. We hope people will come back. Meeting us face to face is so important. And don't discount the minority. That a lot of times the bills will come through committee, that they will go through with Republican sponsorship, but oftentimes our role is presenting amendments. And that if you watch committee hearings, I wish advocates would watch more of the committee hearings, watch the calendar. I know y'all have work to do, but it is work, but it's staying aware, listening to the debates and the arguments and watching the votes, and then coming to us, because the committee process goes usually one committee to another, to the rules, to the floor. And there are a lot of opportunities to get involved and to get your point across to us. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Representative Moray. Representative Hunt.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much for having me. This group is so important. Thank you again so much for your hard work. I know you are not compensated like you should be, and I wish I could change that. But one thing I would say to add to what my colleagues have said is any research that you can show us to support what you are trying to accomplish. For instance, when I earlier mentioned the return on investment of early childhood services in dollars, that really does make a difference when we are making our pleas on the floor or in committees. So I love having data. If you can bring me anything that you have that to support your position or to help your group that you're advocating for, I would really appreciate that. And please remember to call or email us. We really, really want to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Hunt. And Representative Willis.
Thank you. I would echo what Representative Hunt just mentioned. Any data or research that you can provide. We often times will get phone calls or emails, and we need you to act on this, and we need you to do something. And when you ask about an issue, because we can't know everything about everything. We go back and we ask questions, and they don't have answers. Well, we just need you to do something. Well, that's not really going to drive policy. What we need you to do is to provide data and research that you have on a specific issue. Give us real life examples, because as John mentioned earlier, we had an issue with a foster family there that they kind of drove some policy changes, and Representative Moray said the same thing with the young man in the juvenile system. Where there are real life issues and real life examples that help us put a face and an actual situation behind it, kind of helps tell the story. It makes it more compelling. And then obviously, as we're trying to push something through, that helps us as well. And so, however we can personalize something, but with enough data and research behind it to show that it's actually proven, it's effective, especially if other states are doing something, or we've got communities doing something on a small scale level that we'd like to take statewide. Any of that information is always helpful. So thank you for the time today, and we appreciate all you guys do.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all 4 of you for being here today. We know that your time is limited, especially nowadays. So we totally appreciate you giving us your time. And I want to echo what, someone put in the chat. Thank you guys for all that you do for the state and for the issues that are all passionate to our hearts. Thank you so much. We have a few minutes left here at the end so that you guys have a chance, so participants have a chance to answer and complete today's evaluation. We will share the link on the slide shortly, and we really appreciate your feedback. Please take it in the last few minutes if you can, or as soon as possible. It will also be sent out in the email. We will be sharing a recording of today's event soon to you via email, and there will also be certificates of participation available. Please reach out to Carly Whittick at cwhittick@preventchildabusennc.org. Carly will put that information in the chat also if you would like to request a certificate. Thank you so much for being participating in today's Policy Institute, and we look forward to seeing you at our final institute in 2 weeks on Tuesday, October 19th. Thank you again to all our speakers, our panelists, and our participants. Bye. And take a few minutes to fill out the evaluation if you can.